This week we'll go over lesson 2 and 3, and you should be studying still chapter 1 and 2 in Wheelocks. There's a very important concept that we're going to learn in lesson 2, and that is the concept of grammatical case. The term case means the role that a noun has got in a sentence. So the definition of grammatical case would be the various forms of a noun to reflect the job it has in the sentence or the function it has in the sentence. For example, when a first declension noun has an A on it, it is the subject, and therefore it's called the nominative case. When a Latin noun has an AM, it is the accusative case, and it's the direct object usually. In English, we don't use very many endings on our nouns. The only important ending we have on nouns is the s, either to tell us the word is plural, or an apostrophe s to indicate the word is possessive. But in pronouns, we still have the remnants of a case system, which Old English did have a case system similar to Latin. Think of the pronoun he. When it's the subject, you spell it he. When this pronoun is the direct object in a sentence, you spell it him. This is the concept of case. So he is in the nominative case, as they would call it in Latin, and him is the accusative case. His is the possessive case, is what we call the possessive in English, which is called the genitive case in Latin. So all of these pronouns, he, his, and him, mean the same thing. It's just that the pronoun's form changes based on its use in the sentence. In Latin, there were lots of other endings to indicate the uses of the noun in a sentence, because the syntax in Latin is not dependent on word order, but on case endings. So these various endings are called case endings for nouns, because they tell what role that noun has in the sentence. Below you see the first two sets of Latin noun case endings. There are a total of 5 different sets of nouns, but for the first few weeks, all you need to devote yourself to is learning the first and second declension. In each box, the left column is for singular endings and the right is for the plural endings. This workbook will always organize our sets of endings this way, with the left column being singular and the right column being plural. So you can think of these 5 different sets of endings, of case endings, as basically 5 different sets of nouns. These 5 different sets of nouns, or they call them declensions, that's the term for putting a noun in its different spellings, declining it, and so the set of those endings is called the declension. There are 5 different sets of nouns in Latin based on what kind of case endings they use. And these are called the 5 declensions. This is analogous to the way in English grammar we refer to different types of nouns based on the way they spell their plurals. If you've studied old-fashioned English grammar, you might have studied different families of nouns based on how they form their plurals. Some that add an es, some that add just an s, others that add en, as ox. In Latin, what puts a noun in its set is the genitive singular ending. The genitive singular ending is the second ending in the box on the left side. So what you'll see is that when a noun is listed in its vocabulary list, it will list the nominative form and the genitive. Let's look at an example of this. Okay, here in the back of the workbook, you see that there are, in the vocabulary list, here are the lists for animal names. First declension and second declension and third declension. Notice that under first declension, the first word ends in an A, and the second thing listed is the AE ending. That is the genitive singular ending. And the reason it's listed there is to just indicate to you that this word fits into the first declension. So if you'll see in your Wheelock's textbook, if you look at that vocabulary list, it'll be listed that way also. Because in each chapter of Wheelock's, they mix up the various types of words. They don't have them isolated, like, every chapter doesn't just focus on one type of word. They'll have a mixture of first, second, and third declension nouns. And so you have to be able to glance at it and determine which set it fits into. The second declension nouns list the word in the nominative form that usually ends in a US, but not always. And then the second part has an I, a long I. That's the genitive singular. So let's go back to the lesson. Look at page 7. This is a reference page of the various noun cases. Just get an idea of what each of these case names mean, and remember that you can refer to this as a reference page. We are going to be gradually developing the understanding and the use of each of these case forms in sentences as you go through the next few weeks. So don't feel too overwhelmed. These first 2 or 3 chapters are very much an overview, and if you don't feel like you've mastered every detail in chapter 1 and 2, don't worry about it too much. Just keep going and moving forward, and then coming back to this as a reference. They also have a description of these cases in chapter 2 of Wheelock's. But this is sort of a simplified chart of the meanings of the cases. The nominative case is what we would call the subjective case in English. And the genitive case is what we call the possessive case in English. The dative is used in Latin for what we call the indirect object, or a phrase that starts with the idea of to or for whom the action was done. The accusative case is a very commonly used case ending, and this is what we call the objective case in English. It's usually found on the direct object of the sentence, but it's also sometimes used on the object of certain prepositions. Prepositions like trans, which means across, and ad, which means to or toward. Then the last one in our box of endings will be the ablative case. Now this one is an interesting one. It's sort of got an adverbial use, and it's often found on the object of very common little prepositions like with or in or from. So we'll be developing our understanding of the use of the ablative case gradually throughout the weeks. Now to the next page.